Welcome back to another episode of Boots on the Ground, where we bring you insight into Israel's wars, identity, and politics. This week, with the Gaza War and the Ultra Orthodox draft being the main issues, Ari and I will discuss the big picture of how did Israel get here, and more importantly, what are the visions that need to shape Israel's future. But before we get into that, I want to say thank you to our partners here at the Jerusalem Media Group and our sponsors, BeThereIsrael.com. For all those times you can't make it to Israel, BeThereIsrael.com brings you the events live. And as always, please remember to share, subscribe, and comment. We want to continue bringing you great content. Now, on with the show. Ari, how are you?
Great, Shaun. How are you?
Good, thanks. So, as I said in the intro, the big discussions here in Israel right now are the ongoing Gaza War, always talk about a potential ceasefire, but the new aspect is the Ultra Orthodox draft, which is causing havoc in the Knesset.
Right. So I think that one of the things is we can look at, I want to talk about both issues separately for a minute. Because a lot of people try and connect the Haredi draft, the Ultra Orthodox draft issue to the current war in Gaza. And I think that that's really superficial. I think that when we look at the Haredi draft issue, if we look at the big conversations that are being had about it in the media, across the media, English, Hebrew, doesn't matter what language, and it's being talked about as either a manpower question or as a financial question. Like the Haredi community is costing us so much money, and they're not doing anything, for the country. Or the army's short on soldiers and we need more manpower and they're not serving, so let's have them serve.
Right. I think those are two of the most legitimate arguments about the Haredi draft. I mean, it really is. The army is short of people. And on the other hand, the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi population, is a massive population that can add manpower. On the other hand, most of them are not officially working. They're learning. So it is a drain on resources. So you're saying that while we're looking at it like that, it is a little superficial because there's another aspect that we're not paying attention to.
Well, I think both of those are looking at it as a symptomatic way instead of at the core of the question. Because in the end of the day, whether there's a manpower shortage of the army or not, we could have a whole episode where we talk just about that and a solution for that. I don't think that the solution is adding more people. I think the solution is using the manpower you have more efficiently or more wisely and actually winning a war instead of dragging it out. And we can get into that another time. On the financial side, that's a question of time and money. Again, the solution would be financial then. And again, also there, we can just decide to just not pay them as much money and then not require them to draft and solve it. You're dealing with two side issues. I think the core question really comes down to is the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox population, are they part of Israel? Are they part of the Jewish people? Or are they their own independent entity that, like in the diaspora, they were in Europe, now they're mainly in the United States, and when the United States becomes no longer good for them, they'll move somewhere else, and they'll just keep being nomadic around the diaspora. And there happens to be a population of them here in Israel, and they view Israel like every other country in the world, another place for them to currently call home, but they're not part of the country, and they're not part of the nation, and they see themselves separate. And I think that's the core question that no solution's answering. No solution is coming and saying, you are a part of us, you're a part of the Jewish people, now start acting like it and demanding that they act like it, or have them flat out say we're not. Let's be honest about the relationship we have. There's no vision about either bringing them in to be part of the nation or setting up a real wall and saying you are not part of the nation, you're on the outside, for better or for worse. And that comes with great decisions that have to be made. But when we're looking at it just as a manpower financial question, those problems can be solved with or without them. That's not like a bigger issue. And that ties us now into the Gaza War.
Okay, hold on.
We're going to get back to this. I want to lay out the whole idea for a minute, because the whole idea, I think, in this episode, I don't want to talk about the nitty-gritty details of a plan. We can get stuck for hours and hours talking about every minute detail. I want to talk about the bigger picture, like you said at the beginning, this bigger idea. The Gaza War. I think that I haven't heard at least, any current elected official, military leader, anyone in any real position of power present a real vision for what the future of Gaza is going to be in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years, in 200 years from now. There's no one looking at Gaza and saying, this is the solution. Now let's achieve it. Everyone's looking at right now. Right now, there's people in Gaza that need food. Right now, there's hostages in Gaza. Right now, we have to defeat Hamas. No one's talking about, okay, all of that is true. And the details of how we achieve that, we can argue about that from now until the end of the time. But what's going to be, what do you want Gaza to look like in 10 years from now, in 20 years from now? What are my grandchildren going to see and think about when they look at that piece of a geography on the world? And that's the vision that I'm looking for.
I mean, that, like you said, it's a much bigger picture, and we can discuss that in more detail, because going back 10, 20 years, I can't recall any Israeli political leader, or any Israeli leader for that matter, who's had long-term vision like that. We can speak about almost every election that I can recall. It's always been about what they want to achieve now, what is going to change now, what they want to implement now. None of it is about a long-term vision. Nobody can offer a solution of, this is how Israel is going to fundamentally change for the future.
Right. And I think there's a major lack of real visionary leadership in Israeli society for almost 20 plus years already. I would say the last real visionary that was ever in power was Begin. And there really hasn't been any great visionary since him. People can talk about Rabin a little bit with the Oslo Accords. There was some great vision there. Not so sure. I mean, again, it definitely was, if it was a very bad vision and has very much exploded in our faces. But in the end of the day, I think there's a real lack of vision at a leadership level in this country for decades already. And I think that the beauty of war, again, like we've said in the past, great calamity brings great opportunity. In a political system that is so hyper-focused on the right now, and where the price of entry for new parties, for new personalities, for new people is so high, the one great opportunity that war or, tremendous economic downturn brings is the opportunity cost to enter plummet.
Okay, so let's go back and break this down. Right, let's break this down one step at a time. We started off by speaking about the Ultra Orthodox draft and the fact that it is not just an economic issue and it's not a manpower issue. And I like what you said. It's a fundamental issue. It's visionary. Is what is their place in Israeli society? We can go back to many of our European ancestors, especially in Russia. The old idea was, long may the Tsar live far away from us. That the Jews were quite happy to live under Tsarist Russia despite all the issues. And there would be a new Tsar and things would either get better and worse, and that was it. And I've heard this concept before, that in modern societies, whether it's the United States or in Israel, the government of the day is a manifestation of the Tsar. He may have a Hebrew name, they may live in Israel, but the government is essentially a hindrance and something bad that will eventually turn on us, and we want as little to do with it as possible. So that goes from everything to being involved in day-to-day life in the country, because it's got nothing to do with us. We have our own internal lifestyle. And it clearly means we will never have anything to do with the defense establishment, because that's a whole separate issue and there are all kinds of historical traumas, and we want nothing to do with it. So that is where many people in the ultra-Orthodox Haredi community are coming from, is this Zionist entity, the state of Israel, call it what you want, is separate from us and we're separate from it. We want nothing to do with it.
So right, now if that was actually the case, I'd actually be okay with that. There are small, very small sects within the Haredi community. There's like the extremists of Satmar. There's extremists that disconnect completely from the state of Israel. They pay a private service to collect their garbage. They buy their water separately from the water companies. They produce their own electricity with generators. They disconnect themselves. They receive zero government funding for anything.
Okay, but that's a tiny minority.
Wait, it's a tiny minority. But again, what you're saying is they're disconnected when it comes to being part of the country. but they're still connected when it comes to receiving funding for their institutions and for their health care and for the fact that their daily life still exists. They're still here living in the cities that are funded by taxpayers, riding buses that are subsidized by taxpayers, going to educational institutions that are highly subsidized by taxpayers, receiving health care from the national health funds, which are subsidized by the people who have much higher salaries and by by the taxpayer. Yet at the same time, they want to be completely disconnected from it, and they view it as an outside source. And that's where my question comes down to. Are we as a country going to demand that they integrate into the country in everything? You can't just be on the receiving end. You have to be on the giving end as well. Yes, the members of the Haredi community pay taxes to an extent. They're not all not paying taxes. As a percentage and as an amount, it's much lower than the general population. They're a much poorer population. They're also working less. But the reality is that either they have to come into the fold and be part of the nation on every level, in the defense of the country, in the funding of the country, and have to see themselves as active members of this entity that we call Israel, or they have to put this wall up, and it has to be a two-way street. If there's a wall up, there's a wall up. They also can't receive all the national funding. That's the bottom line. Now, I would very much not like to see that happen, but if that's the decision that their society wants to make, I'm sure we can accommodate them.
So going back to the analogy I made of living in Russia under the Tsar, it worked then, unfortunately, even with the problems, is because the Jewish communities in Europe at the time lived in their own self-sufficient shtetls,
Right,
where we
also-
didn't have to worry about the government healthcare system and things like that, because it was all done internally.
But the world was also much smaller, less complicated, and they were living under non-Jewish rule outside of Israel. They weren't living in the Jewish state, in the Jewish homeland, under a Jewish government.
Right. So here comes two fundamental challenges. The first being that in modern society, you're almost never going to be self-sufficient and self-sustaining. You have hospitals, you have schools, you have roads, you have an entire infrastructure system around you that you are benefiting from. And you can't say, oh, I'm not part of the system, yet you're literally walking the roads that are benefiting you. You can't remove
what I was
yourself
saying
from
at
it.
the
That's
beginning.
one. Two, and this is going to be the bigger ideological visionary question is it just a convenience or a coincidence that they happen to be living in the state that calls itself Israel with a Jewish prime minister and a Jewish government, and they could, for all intents and purposes, be living on any other geography in the planet, and they would treat it the same way?
Well, that's the question that neither you or I can actually answer. Their community has to answer that question itself, and it's about time, I think, that it does. But to get into, let's backtrack a little bit, because we're never going to, you and I are not going to be able to answer that question.
That's for their community and their leadership to discuss.
That's for their community and their leadership, and that's actually where I think they need to answer that question. We need to force the reality that it becomes an individual basis. At the moment, let's go back a little bit and make a bigger picture again. Funding for most things in Israel is done on an individual level. This high school gets X amount of money based on X number of students in the school. This university gets X amount of funding based on how many students it has in which program.
Okay.
Funding is, for the most part, again, I'm exaggerating and drawing a very, very broad brush for a minute. Most things in the country are based off the individual. There are this X number of people in this place, so it gets funding based on the numbers of population of people. And the second those numbers change, the funding changes, in conjunction with that. Whereas in the Haredi community, a lot of the funding is communal. A lot of the decisions, even all the draft laws or exemption laws that they've been presenting, are based on community numbers. Not this person drafts or not, but this percentage of a group of people draft, whoever they may be. We'll choose as a community who drafts. Not you, not the army, not the country, not the state. We as a community will decide who we send off into the army and in what percentage we do it in, and we'll keep receiving funding on a communal level. And what I think we need to do is to help them along their journey to make the decision of where they want to be, is to bring it down to the personal level. Up until high school, funding for everything, it needs to be based on that number of students in a program, number of students in a school, get X amount of funding, and equate it. The same way that the funding is equated, the requirements have to be equated to every other state school. You want to receive state funding, you have to teach X amount of English, math, science, and X amount of Judaism. I think we have to equate that across the board as well. And at the same time, equate the funding received, every institution. There should be no difference whether you're a Haredi institution, a secular institution, a national religious institution. Every elementary school and high school should receive the exact same amount of money per student, including the Haredi community, as long as they meet the minimal national requirements of education, like every other school. Make it the same. No exemptions. No, you don't have to teach English because you're learning extra Gemara. No, you don't have to teach science because you're learning extra Rambam. No more of these exemptions that they're separate and special and different. Equate it to the rest of society. And at the same time, everything post-high school, like everywhere else, funding is based on the individual. A yeshiva wants to receive funding for a 19-year-old student who's supposed to be in the army at the moment. The same way Mechina receives funding. They receive funding for a student once he has his draft date and when he's going into the army. And only up until that point, or until he receives a full-out exemption. In university, they receive funding based off of what you're studying. Let's set up a program. Hire a yeshiva gvoa, a 3-year degree in Gemara. Great, do your army service first and get all the funding in the world. And keep funding it that way, and no more communal funding. And then what happens is the responsibility of that decision comes down to each and every single 18-year-old Haredi student that graduates high school. He has to make the decision. Am I leaving the system right now? Again, the requirements and the benefits I'm leaving behind as well. Am I going to not serve in the army? Am I going to avoid the nationalistic system that makes me want to be a part of it? And also be ineligible to receive any funding for anything I do further in my life? Or am I going to make the decision to be part of the country that I'm living in, part of the Jewish people that is much bigger than me and my Haredi community, and take an active role in not just defending it, but creating it? Can you imagine what would happen to the army if all 60,000 eligible Haredim drafted? We'd have a Haredi army within 2 years. The whole country would shift the entire focus around. That's part of the reason why I believe the Chilonim, when they had the Lapid, Lieberman, Bennett government, also didn't pass an exemption law. Why? Because they didn't want them in the army either. Because they realized and recognized drafting the Haredi community en masse would make the army Haredi.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, make that decision personal. That child at the age of 18, who's now an adult, has to decide, am I part of the nation of Israel? Am I part of the Jewish people? Or am I part of this small insular community? And that's it.
So that's exactly, I think, the vision that you're offering, I think, is incredible. The benefits of what you're describing are innumerable. But the practicality of it, and I'm sorry to say, in my mind, is impossible. And I'll explain why. First and foremost, there does not exist any system in the state to ensure your idea takes place. In order to make sure that we know how many people are studying in a school, you need a system to go and check that. Mm-hmm. That does not exist in the Haredi community. They refuse to allow that in. Wait, hold on. Let me.
But
and
it
I'm gonna
did
and I'm going to explain.
Up until the early 90s.
It doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
It doesn't exist. There is no system, outside system, that is allowed to check exactly how many students are in a Haredi elementary school. There is no system outside of the Haredi system. There is nobody outside of the Haredi system that is allowed to check how many people are studying at a Haredi yeshiva. Any yeshiva. Nobody who is not part of the Haredi community is ever allowed to actually count how many boys are actually studying. Nothing exists. The only way to create an enforcement system like that is to have a law. The only way to pass a law in the Knesset is to have the Haredim be part of it. There is no government that has existed that is able to pass major laws without the Haredim being part of the government. So starting with the most basic idea of how many people are actually studying in a high school at any one time will never happen at the moment. Because in order to do that, you need the Haredim to be part of the government to agree to an external structure to check up how many people are actually studying. So it's not going to happen. I appreciate your vision and your idea. It's not going to happen.
So I want to say two things. One, you have to first have a vision to then fail to achieve it, but at least move the ball in that direction. At least try to achieve it. You have to know what you're trying to achieve and then try and achieve it. At the moment, we have appeasement. We don't have a vision. We have, let's get through the next election cycle. Let's get through the next couple of weeks, keeping our coalition intact. We don't have a vision. There's no direction that they're trying to navigate the ship in. There's just, let's not enter this storm that's in front of us. Let's just do what we can to stay away from the storm. We'll end up wherever we end up. If we have a vision, we have an end goal, we can try and achieve it incrementally. Maybe achieving what I laid out all in one go is not possible. Maybe. I might disagree with you a little bit and think that it is possible without the Haredim in the coalition. I think you can force change in a certain extent. And I do believe that money is a very powerful motivator. And when the options are, I'm going to be doing checking on who's where, when, and why, or there's no funding, I think very quickly there's a compromise in the middle that says, we'll check in a certain way that's not as intrusive. And that system did exist up until the early 90s. We forget about it. The system existed up until the early 90s when the Tal Law came in. And the Tal Law got rid of that, where we'll rely on our own reporting. But there was reporting before that, and there is a way of checking it. It's really not that hard. We live in a country where every child who's born, the day you're born, you're given an ID number. And we know where that child is, who those parents are, and it's very easy. We live in a country full of data. Everything is tracked. You can find where you're registered. Whether you're there or not, it's a different story, but where your child is registered, where the child is registered, he can only be registered in one place. And it's really not that hard to do. You could do it on a complicated Excel sheet. And I'm sure there are much better computer programmers out there in this country that could figure out a more efficient way to do it than Excel. But in the end of the day, it is possible. But you got into a different question. It's not practical given the current political makeup of the Knesset.
Exactly.
And there, I agree with you completely. And that gets into, before we even get into discussing a vision of what we could do about Gaza, let's talk about the Knesset for a moment.
Okay.
I want to lay out this idea that's been percolating in my head for a while.
Let's hear it.
Let's hear it. All right. When we look at the Knesset, there's four basic camps in the Knesset. There are the Arabs, there's the Ultra Orthodox, there's the left, and there's the right.
Okay, those are the four basics.
The four basic camps, I'm generalizing. And the reality is you always need two camps to make up a coalition. One of those camps alone is never enough of a majority to rule the Knesset. You need two of those camps together. The current government is the right with the Haredim. The one before that was the left with the Arabs. The one before that was the right with the Haredim. The one before that was the left with the Haredim. There's always two camps that come together to make up a ruling coalition.
I hear you. Okay.
Of those four camps. And this is what I was saying in the beginning, where war, great calamity, brings great opportunity. In the upcoming election, whether it's in a few months or in a year from now, or in a year and a month from now, because we have basically up until October 2026 to have an election, there needs to come a fifth camp. There needs to be a new group it's not Haredi, it's not Arab, it's not left, it's not right. It's going to have elements in it, and this is a camp that I'm working with. There will be a new political entity that forms to the right of center that will be made up of people like myself who have done an enormous amount of reserve duty, who all work, who are part of the real world, who aren't political people from the minute they graduated college and have lived on the public dime their whole lives, who have actually created something and have lived the real world of Israel. And that same thing, its parallel version will be created on the left. And there will be two new entities that, while they won't agree on everything, the core values they'll be able to agree on. And maybe, just maybe I'm a little bit dreaming, but just maybe those two new entities will be able to form the core of a coalition. They won't necessarily agree on everything, but the core vision they could agree on of where the country needs to go, and they can start legislation that will start pushing the ball in that direction. Or maybe, let's go even crazier, those two parties will bring even greater members in to be able to create this core vision for the country that 90% of us agree on. And we can start legislating things in that direction. And slowly with time, the demographics, the reality is the Haredi population is the reality secularism is too strong. There's the internet today, which didn't exist in previous generations. Their outside world is all around them. With or without any legislation, they're drafting in higher numbers. They're working in higher numbers. They're being exposed to the outside world more and more and more. And not only that, their population is growing, but their power in the Knesset is staying the same, which means they're voting for parties that aren't classic Haredi parties. Already, their demographic shift is already happening. And the left side, you see the extreme core of the hardcore left, the Yair Golan, Meretz side, their power is shrinking. There were two parties, they now formed into one party, and their numbers are shrinking as a percentage of the population. And you see that on the same thing, is that this camp is already forming demographically. The question is in the next election, it will be strong enough to start representing itself politically. That's what my greater vision comes down to in the end of the day.
Okay, you've said a lot, so I'm going to break
I'm good at that.
I'm going to break it down very systematically. I'm going to disagree with some of what you're saying. Again, it sounds great to come up with this new political bloc, both center-right and center-left, call it whatever you want. The problem has always been, with very few exceptions, political systems, especially the one in Israel, is not designed for outsiders. It is very much a insider's game. In order to understand how the Knesset works, in order to understand how politics in Israel works, in order to understand how any major aspect of Israel functions, you need to be part of the system. It's no surprise, for example, that when you look at Israel's political left, everyone on Israel's political left right now in the leadership position, ironically, comes from the military, which is bizarre considering that the right is seen as the security administration, yet the Israeli left is run by former generals. Because the system is built, especially on the Israeli left, which is historically the strong parties of Israel, the system is built that you are part of the system because you are always part of the system, and therefore you will always be within the system, and therefore you know how the system works. Within Israel's bureaucracy, for the most part, it's all insiders. Whether you go to the foreign ministry or whether you go to the Ministry of Health, most of the top-level bureaucrats there are all party appointees, whether from Shas or from Aguda or even from Likud. In order to get things moving on a very basic level in Israel, you need the bureaucrats, higher level and mid-level bureaucrats, to move things on your behalf. That's where the real things happen. But they're all political appointees from the parties to make sure that they happen for the benefit of the insiders. So coming from the outside and saying, oh, I've got this wonderful vision, even if it is right, even if it is true, even if it is absolutely authentic, the system will invariably, unfortunately, push you out because you're not part of that vision. Now, I'm going to come up, while I've said a lot of negative things about it, it actually, in my mind, is one of the few parts of Israel that is successful because it has failed. Many of Israel's greatest successes in the last 25 years, outside of the battlefield and outside of politics, all happen within Israel's private sector. There is a reason why Israel's high-tech sector is booming even in the face of war. There's a reason why Israel's medical system, even though it is faced with huge shortages and everything else, are constantly at the forefront of new medical understanding and inventions and theories. Because in this country, the private sector is actually encouraging better people. People who have vision, people who have ideology, people who want to serve but don't want to get bogged down by the government and bureaucracy are coming up with new brilliant ideas in finance, in high-tech, in healthcare, in building, in construction. And these are the actual leaders of Israel. These are the people moving Israel ahead. Israel's future, in my mind, is beyond the government, beyond the socialist state of everything has to come from the government. It is in with the private individuals. It is within the business and private sector that is going to be the future of Israel.
Right. But the country is still ruled by a government that's a political entity.
Correct. And that's going to be a problem forever.
But one second, John, how do you climb a mountain?
Okay.
Climb a mountain, but one step at a time.
Right.
Right? So if we look at the government's dysfunction and all the things that you just said that are wrong with the government, you know, we solve it one step at a time. I'm not saying, none of my vision says that tomorrow we're going to elect the Mashiach, the Messiah is going to come, we're going to elect him to be prime minister, and overnight we're going to fix all the problems. What I'm trying to say is by having a vision, you at least know what direction you need to be traveling in. You know where the top of the mountain is, and now you just have one challenge after another to get there. It's one step after another after another. Remember those long marches we did in basic training? 50 kilometers. This is 93 kilometers, our long brain march, where it's 27 hours long of walking with a couple of stops here and there for 20 minutes. And you think at the beginning, holy crap, I'm going to be walking for 27 hours, and it seems insurmountable. But then you start, it's one step, another step, and before you know it, 27 hours later, you've just traveled 93 kilometers, carrying a third of your 40% of your body weight or 50% of your body, whatever it was, and you just earned your beret. Now, you can't feel the entire lower half of your body. Your brain has gone down to its lowest level of functioning of just having those muscles go one more step, one more step, one more step. Your shoulders are numb, but you accomplished your goal. Now, politics, like you're saying, it's not the private sector. The private sector judges people by success or failures. Investors can look at the people they're investing with and say, okay, this person has all the potential to succeed, and this time he failed, so he'll succeed next time, or he won't succeed next time, or he's got a history of failures or history of success, we can invest with him. Politics doesn't reward you based on success or failure.
Right. That's actually going to be the next point I want to make.
Which is a huge problem. But again, it's because of the people involved, because the people who are the successes, those leaders from the private sector, they look at the political system and they say, why am I going to get involved in this pile of garbage, this ridiculously smelly pile of garbage that's inefficient, that's not successful? Why am I going to money my name in it? And the same thing can be said about people like, why am I going to go to reserve duty? Why am I going to go put my life on the line, endanger my life, endanger my body for something else? And it's that motivation that says, I'm going to get up. This is what's needed from me at the moment. That motivation that drives people like you and I to go leave our home, to leave our families, to leave our work, to go endanger our lives to protect the nation of Israel and the people of Israel. That same motivation was going to motivate the next generation of people who are going to come into politics. They're going to say, look, I can earn great money, have a great life, an easy life working in the private sector, but the same way I felt the need to leave my home and go to the battlefield and put everything on the line for what's best and most important for the nation of Israel right now, politics is the next battlefield. And it's not a battlefield between clear enemies. It's disgusting, it's dirty, it's smelly, it's horrible. Like you said, all the things that are wrong with it. But until people who have real vision, who are willing to put their own personal interests aside and do what the nation needs to get done, until those people get involved in the system, nothing's going to change. And when they do get involved in the system, it's going to be not a small mountain, it's a huge mountain, and it's really steep, and it's really rocky, and it's going to be impossible. But the more that people support them, and the more that we get behind them as a nation, the more we'll see change for the better. And then one day, far off in the future, you and I will be having this conversation, and we'll be talking about how amazingly efficient the Misrad HaRishuy, the Department of Transportation, the licensing office, the notoriously inefficient and horrible organization, is all of a sudden super efficient, and I'm doing everything from an app on my phone. You and I are going to be talking about how, the judicial system is so efficient. This whole lawsuit that someone was involved in took 30 seconds to work through the court system and not 15 years. We're going to talk about the levels of efficiency and the levels of comfort and the fact that there's no friction involved. We'll get there in 50 years from now if the right people get involved. And instead of looking at things as all these problems that are insurmountable, it's when we start looking at them as problems that have solutions that we can solve, and it's worth getting involved with, we'll start solving them.
Well, you've ended on the positive note that we always like to speak about at the very end. So I'm just going to add in I'm going to add in a quick summary of what you've said. One of the reasons why I am disillusioned with politics and the public sector is reward and failure. In the private sector, whatever it is, whether you are building a house, whether you're a construction worker, or whether you are an investor, or whether you are working in an IT firm, you are rewarded for your success, and your failures cost you a lot of money.
Right.
You are a computer programmer, you build a great program, you get rewarded. You go to a better company, your company makes money, you get more money. There is real reward. You are a construction worker, you build badly, the thing fails, your company fails. Sorry, I know I don't mean to be personal, but just
Hey,
there is
we build very well.
Okay. There are clear parameters for success and failure. And sometimes those things happen together. You can fail and succeed at the same time, but it's there. The other side of this coin, though, is government and government infrastructure where you get your reward regardless of whether you succeed or fail. A government bureaucrat, a guy who works in the Ministry of Transportation, he can work well, he can work badly, he will get the same amount of money. A member of Knesset can be a horrible person, not care, but sign legislation. He will be there for an innumerable amount of years. And we have that same system. Now, you're offering a vision, and I really like this. As somebody who, like you said, who's done ridiculous amount of reserve duty, there is no real way to explain the reward we get for our reserve duty. On the scale I just gave, it doesn't exist. I don't get more money for it. I don't see my beautiful wife. I don't get to spend time with my children. I really like the guys I served with, but some of them smell really bad after some of our actions. So explaining the reward we get is impossible. We are motivated by something that is beyond any real description of the reason we want to serve our country and serve our people for hundreds of days at a time. And yes, if there will be political people in the future who can channel that energy of this is the reason we're serving the country and channel that to serve the people of Israel in the Knesset, yes, that might be a possible future of real vision for the country.
So I want to live another positive note on the positive note. I think that what you're trying to talk about is channeling that energy, that reward that we get from serving. It's not that the people currently in those positions don't have that. It's that they've forgotten about what it is because they've been so disconnected from the real life, from the real world, from what they've been so disconnected inside their bubble of the system for so long that they've lost that. And that vision that I have for these people that are coming up, those people exist. And the reward that you and I get is from when we walk around downtown Jerusalem and we see everyone going about their everyday lives like nothing is going on in Gaza or up north. And we know that the only reason that everyone's getting on the bus and going to work is because of people like you and I. When we see regular life happening around us, you and I take a deep breath for a minute and we're like, it's because of what we did that enables this to happen. No one has to say thank you. No one has to recognize it. All the people getting on the bus next to us have no idea who we are. And that's fine with me. Every now and then it would be nice to get a public thank you. I'm not looking for it, but it'd be nice every once in a while. But the idea being is that we get that fulfillment just by looking around us and seeing what we enable to exist. When people like that, who feel that in their every essence of their being, get involved in the political system, huge challenge ahead of them, but they will bring that into the system. And there's nothing you can do about it when the majority of people, even if they're in the opposition and the coalition, they disagree with each other, but their motivation and their vision for the people and the state of the nation of Israel is so great, nothing can get in the way of fixing everything.
Well, I think we're going to have to end it there. There's a lot more I think we can unpack on this. I can still be a little bit more skeptical.
That's
but I
fine.
want to end on that high note. So thank you very much, Ari. I think we had a lot of interesting discussions there. Thanks again to our partners and to our sponsors. And as always, please share, like, subscribe, and we look forward to hearing your comments.